Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. Tonight, we enter a home where the walls did not simply creak, they screamed. The setting was unremarkable at first glance. A small house, sagging with neglect, its paint peeling like dried scabs, its windows clouded with grime. The neighborhood dismissed it as a forgotten place, condemned by time. Yet behind its doors, a story was waiting. One that would not be whispered, but shrieked into history. A woman arrived there with her children, carrying more weight than any one person should. The burden of survival, the burden of raising her family alone. She did not expect comfort from the walls, only shelter. 4 rooms, a roof, nothing more. But the house stirred from the moment they crossed its threshold. At first, it was subtle. Lights flickered without reason. Cold spots pooled in corners, lingering long after the heater sputtered. The children reported whispers, distant voices that sounded just like their mothers, calling to them from empty rooms. At night, when silence should have been her only companion, she felt something heavier. The bed would shudder beneath her. The frame groaned as though another body had dropped beside her in the dark. She would wake, breath caught, heart pounding, convinced she was not alone. And she was right. The air in that house carried a charge, an invisible weight pressing against her chest. Friends who visited left pale and trembling, unable to explain why their skin prickled or why they felt watched. The woman tried to brush it aside. Stress, exhaustion, imagination. But soon, the presence would reveal itself in ways that could not be denied. The whispers turned into touches, and the touches turned into attacks. The mother began to describe nights where she was not merely disturbed, but assaulted. She would wake gasping, her body pinned against the mattress by something she could not see. Fingers clamped around her wrists and ankles, pressing her down with unnatural strength. At times she swore she felt several shapes upon her at once, heavy, overwhelming, and merciless. She cried out to her children for help, but what could they do? They stood frozen at the doorways, watching their mother convulse against an invisible force, her screams ricocheting off the peeling walls. The children, too, became targets of terror. They saw glowing orbs darting through the air, flashes of light that crackled like fire yet left no scorch. They claimed shadowy figures gathered at the edges of their rooms, silent, waiting. Their toys moved of their own accord. One boy shouted that hands had grabbed his hair, yanking him toward the floor. Word of the disturbances spread. Neighbors began to talk, their whispers thick with pity and fear. The house was already a husk of rot, condemned in all but name. Now it was marked as cursed. Some avoided walking past it at night, crossing the street rather than feel those blind windows staring down upon them. The mother, desperate and terrified, sought help anywhere she could. Priests, psychics, friends, some refused to enter the house at all, claiming they felt sick the moment they stepped inside. Others insisted she was delusional, imagining horrors born from stress and despair. But she was not alone in her fear, for soon men of science, trained to dismiss superstition, would step through her door, and even they would find themselves shaken to the core. The woman's pleas eventually reached the ears of 2 men who did not laugh. They were researchers, investigators of the paranormal from a local university. Skeptical, yes, but curious. They had heard whispers of strange cases before. None prepared them for what awaited in that crumbling house. The first time they entered, the air itself seemed alive. Their equipment faltered, batteries drained without reason. Cameras clicked on and off, though no hands touched them. The men described the house as charged, as if invisible currents of electricity crawled through the air, and then the lights appeared, shimmering globes, translucent and glowing, floated through the rooms. They darted across the air like insects of fire, some vanishing in an instant, others bursting with a brilliance that left seared spots in the investigators' vision. The children pointed and screamed. There, while the men snapped photographs, when the film was developed, the orbs were there, suspended mid-air like luminous scars. But that was not all. Shadows twisted into the shapes of people, half-formed and wavering, yet visible enough to send both men stumbling back. One described it as though human figures were trying to step into the room but could not quite emerge. Most horrifying were the nights when they sat with the mother. She would grow restless, her breathing fast, her eyes darting. And then, violence. Her body jerked, thrown as though struck. Once, she was lifted and hurled from her bed with enough force to bruise her face. The men, stunned, tried to intervene, only to feel the same invisible pressure themselves, hands pushing at their chests, the air thick with menace. The house became a battleground, human against something unseen, science against shadow. And still, the woman endured night after night, scarred and shaken, yet alive. The investigators had entered as skeptics. They left with trembling voices, unwilling to say aloud what they feared, that they had witnessed not tricks of light nor madness of mind, but something vast, violent, and intelligent. And still the haunting did not stop. The woman would remain its prisoner, bound to a torment no ritual seemed able to drive away. The house never grew merciful. Its hunger did not wane. Even after priests muttered their rites and investigators carried their cameras away, the woman remained within those walls, exhausted, wounded, but too bound by circumstance to leave. Poverty chained her there as firmly as the entity itself. The assaults continued. Weeks bled into months. At times she reported brief lulls, moments where she thought perhaps the darkness had gone. Then it would strike harder, crueler, reminding her she was not free. The children, already scarred, grew accustomed to living in fear. They slept together, too frightened to face the night alone. Friends abandoned her. Some claimed she was cursed. Others whispered she had brought it on herself. The investigators returned more than once, each visit adding to their growing file of unexplainable events. Orbs of light, moving shadows, violent unseen forces. Yet, even they could not stop it. At best, they could only bear witness. Years later, the woman carried her story with her like a wound that would not heal. The house was eventually abandoned, condemned as it had always seemed destined to be. But those who passed the place swore the atmosphere around it remained strange. Animals avoiding the property, lights flashing through empty windows, the sense of being watched. The mother never found true peace. Her case would linger in the minds of those who studied it, debated endlessly in the gray space between belief and disbelief. To some, she was a victim of a rare and violent haunting. To others, she was a desperate woman whose trauma spilled into visions and nightmares. But the fact remains, too many had seen too much to dismiss it entirely. And now, listeners, the mask is lifted. The story you have heard is not an invention. It is the true case of Doris Bither, a woman living in Culver City, California in 1974, whose horrific accounts of spectral assault became one of the most disturbing paranormal investigations in history. The case became infamous as the entity haunting. Her ordeal was later adapted, first into a novel and then into the 1982 film known simply as The Entity. A movie that horrified audiences, but behind it stood the scars of a real woman and her children. The Vault does not trade in ghost stories for cheap thrills. It trades in truths that sink their teeth into you long after the telling. If you have a horror story of your own, feel free to drop it in the comments. You never know, the next story could be yours. Subscribe to The Vault and never walk alone again. We upload daily, and one night, the story might be yours.